Alright guys, here's what we're going to do. Our next shooting assignment is designed to transition us from the color pictures we've been taking into black and white photography. Most of the pictures we're going to take with this next assignment will follow the same rules and criteria of what we've done. We're only changing one thing with that so that you can continue being successful with good solid composition skills, with good solid lighting skills. This time we're just shifting to black and white from color. Okay, so the pictures that we take in our class, God willing, that we get to figure out how to use the darkroom. I'm not sure whether that's going to be possible, but we're still hopeful that that's what's going to happen. But our course is usually shooting black and white photographs with film, and I'd like to transition into that style of photography. So giving up color is a tough thing to do when we go to shoot. It's the one thing that makes some things beautiful to us, but we need to begin to train our eyes to see in highlight and shadow rather than in color. So that's the next thing to think about, is how highlight and shadow work, because color's not helping us anymore. So to do that, we look for beautiful light. There's a real key to that when we use black and white images. Okay, also, because we're really dealing with very simple things, I would like you to consider a simple or plain background, so no extra clutter. Of course, one thing that you might not have had to do prior to this is to make any adjustments in your image editing in your phone, because I know your phone cameras have some in-editing qualities. If you're using a DSLR, I'm sure you've got some software on your computer or in your camera that you can make some subtle adjustments to adjust your contrast. Might be helpful too, although not required. But because if your light is beautiful, your image will be beautiful, and you don't need those adjustments to help you. All right, so here's the basic assignment. Just like we've done before, you must take a photograph that is in grayscale, which is basically all values, no color, or what we also call black and white. It's the same thing, same words for the same thing. In this, we're going to keep all of the rules the same. So we're going to have a rule of thirds or leading lines composition. That's worth 20 points. This time, again, looking for beautiful light is more important than ever, so that the highlight and shadow around our objects are effective. And of course, feel free to adjust your contrast and highlights in your image if you can or it's desirable. And then, of course, at 5 points for our selfie with your scene or objects. Again, projects worth 50 points as we move into bigger picture taking assignments. Given that this is photography class, we're trying our best to get some version of the course in this strange curriculum, and pictures are always due on Wednesday. So let's look at some examples. This is very similar to an image we looked at when we looked at rule of thirds and leading lines. Very simple. It's a little flower tucked into some boards of a deck or a fence. And the lighting is really clean here. You've got a nice gray deck and a very contrasty white flower and a very clean rule of thirds. I love how this image here pops up right where those, creates this little Y here, and that it's at the cross point of those spaces, and this is right on the thirds line. So it's really effective use of rule of thirds and a nice black and white image. Here's a very simple flower. There's a little bit of water spritzed on it to make it feel a little bit more alive. Live flowers always photograph better than artificial flowers because you can tell that they're fake. So if you've got access to live flowers, even if they're not roses, they will look better than artificial flowers. Notice how simple the background is in this. It just fades to that dark gray and black along the edges, and the light is simple but direct and pretty with this image. If the light weren't direct, casting these strong shadows in the middle around these petals, the image would be much more flat and not as effective. So light's super important here. Here's a really simple image of a woman laying back here. She's silhouetted by the sky. She's in a rule of thirds position, and the fact that she's on the stairs is, of course, leading lines. The geometry of this image really stands out. I don't think there's any buildings like this in the Warminster and Southampton areas, so of course recreating this one exactly is not possible. But thinking about how you can use architecture and existing architecture and the shadows within it are real helpful, and just looking at how you can frame the geometry so it doesn't look like a building anymore. This is just a black rectangle with sort of a gray rectangle frame around it, and then this stretched out shadow part, and then a dark gray stripe at the bottom. There's textures, there's this strong shape, and of course a rule of thirds composition. But the geometry in this image is so strong. But looking at buildings or objects around you, cracks in the sidewalk, things painted in the road, things like that can really help when you crop things out and isolate the objects. You can create some really interesting images. Very simple picture of boots, but the fact that there's nothing else in the space around them makes this really effective. It almost feels like a portrait of work boots. And that exterior light from a window or a door that's just off of the camera here. It's just to the left of where these shoes are shining on them, create that beautiful light. And then in a black and white photograph, you really get the form is excellent here. Interior light, fluorescent lighting is truly the worst, but most inside light is very flat and doesn't show that form. So finding a window or a door or actually going outside to photograph something will give you the best light. I love this plant. I love the negative spaces in and around the plant, whether that's a wall or a window, I don't know, but it's a great rule of thirds composition that's in black and white, has some great sense of light to it. The way that these giant leaves crop off of the edge too are really interesting. This image is here all about light, the way the light is shining through the glass and onto the surface. I know Art 3, if anybody's in Art 3, they just finished doing these drawings of light bulbs that look really similarly to this, where you try to capture the way the light moves through the glass and projects and reflects, and you capture those forms. Really beautiful, super simple. It helps that this light bulb is clear and not white, but you can use any simple object that light's going to move through, a water glass, a mason jar, something like that on a clean white background to really capture the reflection and refraction of that light. Makes things really interesting. So think about simple objects on a simple background with a clean, direct light source. Here is a shallow depth of field image, right? We talked about that recently, where this clock here is in focus and whatever's going on in the background is out of focus. It's a very strong rule of thirds composition, very simple. Again, a single object. Sometimes you can put symbolism or meaning into an object like a timepiece, a watch, a clock, something like that, to be able to create some emotional meaning with it. But it can also just be a beautiful object that's there in that rule of thirds spot. This image here with this sunset light creates, with very strong leading lines because of the bridge and the railroad tracks, creates a very strong rule of thirds leading lines image. Of course, in black and white gets a little bit more dramatic than color at this point. Portraits are lovely in rule of thirds. It's actually an assignment we specifically do, which is a portrait assignment, shooting rule of thirds with different light sources. Here, this is probably a studio light, but you could accomplish something very similar with a clean wall, or throwing, a sheet up on the wall, pinning or taping it to the wall to get a clean backdrop, and then shooting with window light directly on someone's face and then framing it rule of thirds. This one in particular is probably done with some studio lights and a black backdrop. So it's a little bit more complicated than what we're going to do, but a version of it is completely within your reach, given a window with bright sun coming in and perhaps having somebody stand behind and hold up a blanket or a sheet or something to create a smooth, dark, or light even, but a nice simple surface. Good luck, guys. Do your best. I want your best one with your selfie due next Wednesday. As always, pictures are due on Wednesdays.